Do you struggle starting a conversation in English? You can listen, you can understand, you can follow what other people are saying, but when you have to be the one to start the conversation, it can be difficult. Or perhaps you work with English and you can follow what your colleagues are saying, but sometimes when you are hosting the meeting, when you are the person in charge of the meeting, you find it difficult to direct the conversation. You find it difficult to move on to the next topic. Well, in that case, you are in luck because today's video is going to be a lesson on exactly that, how to start a conversation or move a conversation in a particular direction. And as there is no time like the present, let's get started. Now, that's a fantastic phrase, and I want this to be our first phrase today. There's no time like the present. This is something you can say to move your conversation meeting onto what you're going to talk about. So let's say, for example, you're in a situation where you have to introduce yourself. Hi, I'm Catherine. I'm a business English teacher, blah, blah, blah. There's no time like the present. Let's get started. This identifies and shows your audience that we are now starting the topic that we are here to talk about. And no time like the present is exactly what it sounds like. The present is now, let's start now. Another phrase you can use to start the conversation, start the meeting, start the discussion is, right, let's get down to business. Or getting down to business, our first point is, getting down to business means we're starting. All the casual introductions, all the how was your weekend, how's your day been, all of that's finished. Let's get down to what we need to talk about, which is business. Or even if you are not discussing business, let's say you go to a doctor's appointment, they might also say, let's get down to business, because what they are saying is, what's the main topic here? Why have you come here? I'm glad you had a good day, a good weekend, but why are you here? What do you need from me? A really simple one, I'd like to start by introducing myself. I'd like to start by referring to something that happened last week. I'd like to start by showing you this graph on the screen. I'd like to start by congratulating everyone. I'd like to start by identifies, okay, I am starting now and this is my first point. Why don't I give you an idea of? Now this sounds like you're asking a question, but it is a rhetorical question, which means a question where no answer is expected. Why don't I give you an idea of the figures from last year? Why don't I give you an idea of our plan for how we can move forward? Why don't I give you an idea of why we are here today? And then you would go into exactly what it is you want to talk about. What about if you need to change the focus of your audience, of your team, of the group of people? Perhaps you've been talking about a topic for too long, or you're not getting anywhere with your topic. It's just causing arguments, or this group says yes, this group says no, and you're not getting anywhere new. We could say, so that's decided, let's move on to the next topic. So that's decided. Our next topic is, what we're saying is, okay, I'm glad we have decided that topic. I'm glad we have finished with that topic. Of course, you have to have decided something, because if it is undecided, you couldn't say, okay, that's decided. Shall we move on? Shall we move on? Or let's move on. Now, let's move on, of course, is a suggestion. But what you're saying is, okay, we're moving on now. Whereas shall we move on is a question. And someone might say, yeah, sure. Or 1 minute, we just need to focus on this first. I have a student who told me a very funny story. I felt kind of sorry for him because move on, when translated to languages such as German, just means, okay, let's go to the next point. So this student was asked his opinion on something. And he said, yep, sounds good, move on. Now, move on by itself in English sounds quite rude. It's almost like, I don't really care about this. It's not important. We need to be talking about something else. So whilst he was not technically wrong in what he said, everyone in the meeting went silent because it was a bit blunt. It was a bit too direct. If you tell someone to move on, you're telling them what you're saying is not important enough for us to focus on. So everyone in his meeting went silent and he felt very uncomfortable. But if you say, shall we move on? Or let's move on? Or how about we move on? It's a bit more polite, it's a bit more soft and indirect. Okay, getting on to the next point. So everyone's talking and they're discussing what you've just mentioned. Okay, getting on to the next point, blah, blah, blah. Our sales are down. We haven't found a new employee to meet the team, to join the team. Perhaps we should also consider. So maybe the team is discussing and they're not getting anywhere and you think actually that there's something they're missing here. By saying perhaps we should also consider, and then your point, what you're saying is, I agree or I disagree, it doesn't matter. I understand, I recognize what you're saying, but you haven't thought of this. So let's say your CFO, Chief Financial Officer, says, we need to increase profits. Let's bring out a new product this year. And everyone's discussing what kind of product we could bring out. And you say, perhaps we should also consider if we have enough people to work on a new product. Or perhaps we should also consider improving one of our original products. So it's quite a nice way to bring up something without saying, hey, you forgot to think about this. Or you've overlooked something. You can say, perhaps we should also consider, and then mention what it is that you think they may have forgotten or are not discussing. Likewise, if you need to interrupt someone, now typically interrupting is frowned upon. It's not polite to interrupt somebody else. Of course, it depends on your culture and the way people talk to each other in your culture, but in British English and also in American English, it's quite rude to talk when somebody else is talking. However, there are situations where you need to. For example, your manager has gone on a 10-minute rant about something that happened last week and how it's not been resolved and how the client is unhappy. And how are we going to fix this? How are we going to solve this? But actually, you've already spoken to the client and you've already got the result, the answer. You can say, could I just interrupt for a moment? Or, I'm really sorry, let me just interrupt. Or even, sorry for interrupting, but. And these three phrases are a way of saying, look, I know I'm being rude, I know I'm interrupting you, but I need to because I need to correct something you've said or add on to something you've said. What about if you want to return to an earlier point? The conversation has moved on, you're discussing something different, but you think of something related to an earlier topic. Going back to what I said earlier, or going back to what you said earlier. Or if you want to be really polite, sorry, let me just go back to what you said earlier. Let me just back up a second. I want to focus on that topic mentioned. Let me back up a second, or let me just back up a second. It's a phrase that just means we need to go backwards. You could also say, sorry, I know this has been mentioned, but I wanted to refocus on. I just had a thought related to an earlier topic. Do you mind if we quickly go over it? All of these phrases suggest, yes, I know we've covered this, but actually I think this needs to be said. Now, if someone interrupts you or someone goes back to an earlier topic, sometimes it's necessary, but of course sometimes it is not necessary and it actually disrupts the meeting more than if you just allowed the meeting to carry on. Perhaps they're bringing up a topic from earlier that's actually been resolved, and there's no point in talking about it again. Or perhaps this person always interrupts you, so it's no longer polite, it's actually impolite every time they do it. What you can do is you can say things that kind of stop that thought process, that conversation in their tracks. Stop that from happening, from going forwards. One of the ways you can do this is by saying, "Sorry, if I can just finish, I was saying that." Or, "Sorry, if I can just finish what my point was. Sorry, if I can just finish, I wanted to mention that." So you're saying, yeah, I recognize you need to interrupt or want to interrupt, but let me just finish first because perhaps what I'm about to say actually answers your question or actually relates to what you're about to say. If somebody brings up a topic from earlier and it's completely irrelevant now, of course you can say, "I think we're losing sight of the main point." "I think we're losing sight of" is a really nice way of saying we're not focused on the right things here. We are focusing on things that are irrelevant or take too much time. You can end this with any other phrase. "I think we're losing sight of the goal." "I think we're losing sight of what the client wants." "I think we're losing sight of the main topic of this meeting." "I think we're losing sight of what we came here to discuss." It's a very polite way of saying we're not going to discuss that because it's not related to what we need to talk about today. And lastly, buying time. Buying time. Sometimes you need a bit of extra time to come up with an answer. And I do have a full video on what to say in these situations, which I will link up here. I always forget which side it's going to be on, but this side. When you get asked a question and you need a bit of time to come up with an answer, or you're waiting for a colleague to give you the answer, or you're waiting for an email or a response from a client, you need a bit more time. You can say something such as, "It's a difficult issue. It's a difficult topic. It's a complicated issue, a complicated topic." It's a way of answering a question without actually giving an answer. "Catherine, how's it going with client A?" "It's a difficult issue. I'll email you later." Or, "It's a complicated topic. I'll let everyone know after the meeting." Or, I'll update you by the end of the day. It just suggests, look, there's something more going on here. But they don't know if there's something more going on here. So you can say this if you need more time. "Could I get back to you on that? Could I get back to you on that?" You're asking for permission to give the answer later, not right now in this meeting. "Do you know what the sales results were last month? Could I get back to you on that? I don't have them with me." "Do you know why the client decided to stop working with us? Could I get back to you on that? They haven't responded to my email yet." You're asking for permission, but also saying, "I don't have that information, but I will find out and I will give you that information." Last one. This can be seen as rude, so be careful how you say it, but why don't we come back to that later? Now, of course, if you don't come back to that later, you could be seen as just ignoring this person, pushing them off to later in the meeting. But if you say, "Why don't we come back to that later?" and then at the end of the meeting, say, "I know Catherine raised a point during the meeting. What was it again, Catherine? Let's just go over that." So if you say, "Why don't we come back to that later?" you do need to go over it. Otherwise, it can be seen as rude. Perhaps somebody has asked a question that's actually in your presentation. It's in your meeting. It's in your notes. But they've asked too early. So you could say, "I will get to that later. Just let me get through this part and then I'll answer your question." It's a way of saying, "Yes, I am planning on talking about that, but right now we're focused on this." And what about if you attend a meeting and you need more information? You don't actually understand. You don't understand what they've said, or it wasn't clear, or perhaps you need more information than they've given you. Here are some phrases you can use. "I'd be interested to know something more about," and of course the topic. So maybe they quickly went over a topic that's important for you to complete your job, but they didn't go into enough detail. I'd be interested to know more about this campaign you are planning. I'd be interested to know more about how you're going to improve morale in the office. Could you be a little more specific? This is a very nice way actually of testing if somebody really knows what they're talking about. Because if they're reading from their notes from their presentation and they're not going into detail, it could be because they don't know, don't have that information, or somebody else has prepared that presentation for them. So again, if you are in a meeting and you need more information and you feel that this is not the right person to be asking for that information, you could say, could you be a little more specific about, and then the topic. This will encourage them to go into more detail if they have those details. Could you go over that again, please? Maybe you need more clarification. You didn't hear. They weren't clear in what they were saying. Could you go over that again, please? It's very polite. It's very professional. It's a nice way to just say, I didn't understand. Could you explain it again for me? And finally, sometimes we have managers or leaders that actually don't know your role very well or don't know the business very well, but they have been promoted to this point. And you have to check actually that they know what they're talking about, and you have to get the right information so that you can pass that information on to your team. In a situation like this, you could say, so if I understand you correctly, and then repeat what they've said. So for example, let's say I'm your new boss and I say to you, you need to have everyone do 5 hours overtime a week, but they won't be getting paid for it. And you're shocked because why should my team do 5 hours overtime every week and not be paid for it? So I can say, or in this situation, I'm the boss, so you could say, so if I understand you correctly, they have to do an extra 5 hours a week on top of what they already do, and they're not getting paid for it. It's not only a way of clarifying, but it's a way of pointing out, do you know that what you're saying is a bit unreasonable? Do you recognize that what you're saying sounds kind of bad? And typically that person will then say, yes, I know it sounds bad, but it's only for the next 3 weeks. And then they will go back to their normal hours. You know, they'll explain it in more detail. There are various ways of saying this. A more informal, kind of direct, potentially rude way would be, so let me get this straight. So let me get this straight. You want everyone to do 5 hours extra and not be paid for it. That would be very direct. There are situations where you need to be direct, but of course saying, just so I can understand, they need to do 5 extra hours and they're not paid for it. It makes it sound more like you're the problem rather than the person explaining is the problem. But by repeating it back to them, you're allowing everyone in the room to listen to what they are suggesting a second time. And that second time, actually, they might think, hey, that doesn't sound quite right. That doesn't sound quite fair. So as I said, I will link the video on what to say when you don't know what to say, because that's a very nice follow-up video to this one. This is how to kind of start your presentation, your meeting, lead it in a different direction. And then the other video is how to answer in a meeting when you don't have that information, don't know that information. I hope there was something helpful here for you today. Please like and subscribe if there was, and I will see you next time. Have a fantastic week. Bye-bye.